Hi, and welcome back to Resilience Unravelled. And my guest today is Fleet Maull, which is a brilliant name. I can hear from the accent that you're from across the pond. So where in the world are you?
I'm in the East Coast. I grew up in the Midwest actually, but I've been on the East Coast for about 15 years. I live in Western Massachusetts, about 2 hours west of Boston, right on the Connecticut River in an area called the Five Colleges area because there's five colleges and universities around here. And we're kind of right between the college towns of Amherst and Northampton. And we in a little New England village called Hatfield that was founded in the 1600s, which is old by U.S. standards, not in Europe, obviously, but by U.S. standards, it's old, and in terms of the colonists anyway. And yeah, a little quiet village, very rural, a lot of organic farming, so an abundance of great food around, and the Connecticut River is literally right out our back door, so it's a nice place to live.
Very good. So you're that sounds a lovely part of the world. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Oh, sure. One of the primary things I am, I guess, is a meditation teacher. I've been deeply involved in the path of meditation and inner work for more than 50 years, primarily in the Tibetan Vajrayana and Zen Buddhist traditions, although I've always been really passionate about the science, art and science of meditation. So I've studied everything, I've read everything. I've studied with teachers across many different Buddhist traditions, including Vipassana, not only Zen and Vajrayana, but Vipassana and Pure Land, the Vedic traditions, the Abrahamic traditions of meditation, secular non-dual, all the neuroscience informed stuff. So it's really my passion, and I've developed a my own model of meditation called Neuro Somatic Mindfulness Meditation, which is a very deeply embodied, trauma-informed, neuroscience-informed approach that integrates really all the classic meditation technologies from the East and West with current neuroscience and biofield science as well. So that's really a passion of mine. And I've been a business coach and a mindset coach for a long, long time. And I developed Heart Mind Institute, which is a transformational education online platform. Primarily, we do summits, big summits. We also have a lot of online courses and online coaching programs. We do summits in resilience. In fact, our very first summit, I'd done a lot of summits before with others and for others and helped others organize them and been a guest and been a host. But the first summit we did under my company, we did just as the lockdowns were happening
Ah,
in May of 2020. I had this flash in March of 2020 with what was happening with the pandemic and the lockdowns that we really needed to have a conversation about resilience. And so I talked to my wife, I think we need to do a summit. And she thought I was a little crazy, but she agreed. And we did our first summit, the Global Resilience Summit.
okay, interesting. So you give me a lot to talk about there. So let's start with the obvious stuff, the meditation stuff. So you talk about all these different traditions of meditation. You talk about, and then you start bringing in neuroscience. What's how does neuroscience sort of inform the practice? So how does it add value or change your perception of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just the understanding that we have from the last several decades of neuroplasticity, the fact that our brain and our neural architecture can be reshaped, and that in fact it is reshaping itself all the time for better or worse, depending on what we expose it to. It's not as fluid or plastic as it was when
Mm.
we were young children, but it's still definitely changeable, and we can reshape our neural architecture for the better or for the worse. And meditation has a direct impact on that. But also, more specifically, there's a field within neuroscience called network neuroscience, which is about all the different neural networks and their interrelatedness with each other and the way they impact each other and so forth. And so there's five neural networks I talk about that I think are very directly related to spiritual evolution and to awakening altogether. And these are the attention network, obviously, with mindfulness meditation of any kind, we're training our attention. The
Mm.
self-regulation network, we're also learning to regulate our own autonomic nervous system, which has the upregulating sympathetic branch and downregulating parasympathetic branch. They're both happening all the time. And most of us modern humans have too much sympathetic arousal, which is stress, not enough parasympathetic arousal, which is rest and digest. And the good news is because they're connected with the breath, we can actually learn to regulate our own autonomic nervous system with the breath. Because when we breathe in, there's a slight activation of the sympathetic branch, the upregulating branch. And when we breathe out, a slight activation of the downregulating parasympathetic branch. So obviously,
Mm.
by emphasizing the out breath, we can get more parasympathetic activation, right? And we can learn to regulate our own nervous system. In fact, if we're feeling sluggish and drowsy, we can upregulate by doing some quick abdominal breathing and various other means. But meditation naturally helps improve overall regulation of our autonomic nervous system. So we have the attention network, self-regulation network. Self-regulation network also helps us regulate our emotions. So you have the emotion regulation network, and it's been shown that regular meditation increases, enhances emotional balance and emotional intelligence and so forth. And then the next two networks I want to talk about are really critically important to this approach I take called neurosomatic mindfulness. And one is the task positive network, and the other is the default mode network. Now,
Mm.
the default mode network is active when we don't direct our attention. If we just let our mind be, let it wander, let it do what it's doing, which is what most of us are doing most of the day, it just wanders all over the place. And it tends to time travel into the past and worry about the past, time travels into this imagined future and worries about or fantasizes about the future, keeps a running commentary going about the imagined present, which isn't even really the present,
Mm.
and forming all our opinions and all our self-thing. And so it's the source of all our self-created stress. Now, it has its purpose. If you can free it from the pervasive fear and anxiety of the human condition and be in a safe, relaxed state, then it can be a source of tremendous creativity. That's what happens with a lot of artists. In psychoanalysis on the couch, you're in a safe space, you do free association. So it has its purpose, but for most of us, it's just a source of stress and anxiety. Now, the good news is the task positive network, which is activated when we direct our attention in any way, the task positive network and the default network have mutually antagonistic or mutually inhibitory relationship. So you bring the task positive network online, the default network starts to go offline. Now, let me give you a quick example. Most of us have probably at one point or another in our life tried to thread a needle, right? A
Mm.
sewing needle. So you have your thread, maybe you lick the thread to get a nice sharp point. You got that needle and you're really trying to focus and get that thread through the needle. At least for a moment, your mind gets very quiet. You
Mm.
may not be able to sustain it, but for a moment, your mind gets very quiet. That's that shift. Literally, your brain is shifting its organizational flow from the default mode network to the task positive network in that moment. So the question is, how can we sustain that? Because a lot of people, in fact, almost all people, when they begin to try to meditate, they encounter the default mode network, the very noisy brain, a chatterbox
Mm.
between our ears. Sometimes people call it the monkey mind, right? Just chattering away, right? And most people try to struggle with that, which is counterproductive, or they think the idea is to stop your thoughts, which doesn't work and is counterproductive, because the real instruction is to just let your mind be.
Mm.
Just let your thoughts come and go. The problem is they're sticky. We get caught up in them. We're down the rabbit hole of discursive thinking. We've lost our awareness, right? So how do you develop that awareness? Now, a lot of instructions say pay attention to something. Pay
Mm.
attention to the object of mindfulness, right? Well, often that is the breath and the body. However, another thing to understand is that our brain is very quickly replacing direct experience with conceptual experience all the time. When we're out walking, we see a tree. Do we really see that tree or connect with the tree? Or how quickly does the brain replace any kind of direct experience with the concept of tree, an archetypal image of tree, or an oak tree or maple tree? But we're really not connecting with that living entity that we call tree. So the
Mm.
world we live in is really, we live in a conceptual overlay. And actually, the spiritual traditions of awakening are about really how do you break through that conceptual overlay and how do you get out of conditioned experience into direct experience of reality as it is, right? So when we direct our attention to the body or breath, it doesn't really ground us and noun us in the way it could. So in my approach to meditation, we work with really feeling the body at the sensate level, actual tactile physical sensation. All the sensations on the surface of the skin, which is one vast sensory organ from head to toe, and those sensations travel to a particular set of neural networks of the brain that are highly myelinated, highly efficient, and therefore we're very sensitive to touch. But then also awakening to the internal landscape of tactile physical sensation activating the capacity known as interoception, which is just
Mhm.
short for internal perception, or an interoceptive awareness. And what begins to be revealed to us with a gentle effort is there's this vast internal landscape of sensate experience. Now,
Mhm.
we're all very aware of interoception because it's how we know when we're tired or thirsty, hungry, when we need to use the restroom. It's how we experience a headache or muscle pain or indigestion. But absent discomfort, most of us ignore the body, especially the internal landscape of the body, much to our own detriment. And thus, we're caught up on our heads. We're out there somewhere. We're very disembodied. In Western culture, we've all been enculturated to lead very disembodied lives, which leads to most of the problems we have in the world. So,
Mhm.
coming back home to the body, we can learn to feel the body at deeper and deeper levels. And we're starting off at gross physical sensation, right? But the deeper you go, you're going into subtler and subtler sensation and into the very depth of what the Eastern traditions is called subtle body, subtle mind, and then into being and into the very profound depths of what it is to be a human being or a spirit or the spiritual dimensions. And along the way, because the vehicle you're taking is through the body, you're transforming your neural architecture. The brain and nervous system remembers how to get there. It learns the route, develops new neural networks. So you have much more direct access and more abiding access to deep states of attention stabilization, which lead to deeper states of awareness, which lead to deep states of flow, which are profoundly healing and which profoundly deepen our resilience. And this makes it a whole lot easier to do because as we connect with that, the actual sensations of the body, external and internal, that's very compelling. It's an abiding, continual activation of the task positive network. The mind quiets down quite naturally, and we don't need to struggle with it. We can just let it be. It'll quiet down by itself because we're really feeling the body, which anchors us in nowness. And that vast internal landscape is just endless, and it's actually very compelling and fascinating to just this exploration of really feeling our body at deeper and deeper levels. And of course, as we feel into the body at deeper levels, we're also feeling into the emotional body. So we're becoming more emotionally sensitive, more emotionally aware. And because we're tuned into our emotions, they're not hijacking us. We're feeling them at the most subtle levels. And all this is untangling our nervous system, it's healing trauma, it's deepening resilience, it's enhancing emotional intelligence, and potentially leading to awakening. So I mentioned those, that's really the important shift there is that activate the task positive network in an abiding way. The noisy default mode network goes offline. The quiet mind quiets down, makes it easier to meditate. Attention stabilizes, which is the portal into the deeper states of awareness. But also along the way, of course, we've strengthened our attention network. We've strengthened our capacity for self-regulation, for emotion regulation. And then the fifth network I talk about in this path is our ability to connect with others, our connection network, our empathy network, right? So
Mhm.
it turns out that the neural network involved in creating connection with other, creating intimacy with other, what's called co-regulation. You and I, to one degree or another, are co-regulating right now, even over Zoom, right? And so we have something called neuroception, where our nervous system is continually reading the environment around us. And so if I'm sitting here with a smile and good posture and speaking in a well modulated tone, I'm communicating safety and openness and relationship. Your nervous system is picking that up. It's responding in kind. We're creating a flow, we're creating connection, we're creating potential intimacy, positive relationship, and so forth. Whereas if I'm disconnected and I'm not really that present, then I'm communicating and I'm got a lot of fear and going on that. Well, that's what I'm communicating, which is not inviting
Mhm.
relationship. And it turns out the same neural networks that involved in being deeply embodied, like really being awake to the external and internal landscape of the body, being deeply in the body. The neural networks that are involved in that are also involved in our ability to connect with others. So the more deeply embodied we are, the more able we are to connect with others, right? So that's this pathway of the neuroscientific understanding. And it also brings in a newer area of science, which we're just beginning to measure and is becoming a valid area of scientific exploration called biofield science. And
Mhm.
biofield references the electromagnetic fields of the body. Now we know we can measure brain waves with an electroencephalogram. We know we can an EEG. We can measure our heart with an electrocardiogram, right? There's also things for measuring electricity in the muscles, and there's one other I'm not thinking of. But we know how to measure electricity in the body, right? And really, we have an electric body. Our whole body functions on electricity. And at deeper level, there are subtle electromagnetic fields. And these in the Eastern traditions were called the pranic fields, or even deeper, the etheric fields. In quantum theory, it could be called the quantum body. And in Western science, they're starting to use it. And in Chinese, it's qi, and Japanese is ki, as in qigong and tai chi and aikido, those kind of things. What's measured with the meridians of acupuncture and acupressure. So this is all the world of the electromagnetic fields of the body, which previously was considered very alternative. But now in science, we're beginning to open to that, and Western science, and the term usually used is biofield. And we actually know the biofield penetrates the whole body. The whole body is an electromagnetic, chemical, biological phenomena. And that radiation electromagnetic field extends out from the body a little bit, right? And we're getting to where we can detect that. That's the biofield. Actually extends mostly, the heart radiates more energy than any other center of the body. But at any rate, by tuning in, we can learn to begin to feel this, and we can begin to tune in. And we're really returning to source. If you imagine, in terms of resilience, if you imagine like computers, I don't know if it's even that necessary anymore, but you used to always put them to sleep at night, right?
Mm.
And sometimes, well, the older ones, you had to run a defrag program to
Yeah.
defragment all the broken circuits and stuff that accumulate over time, right? Now it kind of does it on its own while it's sleeping, right? And that's actually what our body does while our sleep as well. While if we get a good night's sleep, the brain is sloughing off all the defragmented stuff and everything, right?
Yeah.
Through the lymphatic system. But also, if you could imagine that at night we actually had a plug and we could just plug it back into source, right? And overnight we just get the whole thing gets defragged, resourced, a reset. We get a complete reset, right? Like a factory reset overnight. When we're doing this kind of deep meditative work, we're returning to source. That's what we're doing. We can get into profoundly deep states of flow. And we're really dropping into the deepest level of being, the quantum level, whatever level of spirit, if people want to talk about the divine, however people want, but we're really going back to source where nothing's broken. And when we connect with that, it heals everything, right? And resets everything. So, and that's really the most profound source of resilience, ultimately.
Well, you've answered that question quite thoroughly. So let me ask you a couple of speedy questions. You talked about the concept of a tree earlier, and then, of course, what we do is we imagine what that tree's like. Yeah, as sort of the brain's prediction machine. So, how is being in your body any more than just a concept being in your inside of your body?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my very first meditation teacher made a distinction between what he called psychosomatic body, which is the conceptual body. It's made up of our thoughts and feelings about the body, our memories, our images, all that, right? And then he made a distinction between that, what he called body, which is the direct sensate experience of physical sensation. So when I'm practicing myself and guiding others to practice meditation, I invite them to really get into feeling the actual micro sensations. For example, very common to do mindfulness of breathing, right? So I'm mindful, I'm aware of my breath. So very quickly, I'm just relating with the concept of breath. Now, I know I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, so I can feel it somewhat. It's not completely conceptual, right? But if I drop in and start really feeling the micro sensations I feel, even at the nostrils, for example, right? So there are some meditation practices where you pay attention to the air moving across the surface of the skin at the nostrils. Well, if you really try to actually feel every little the tingling, the pricklies, and the pins and needles, every little sensation, the coolness, the warmth, as the air moves across the skin, you're starting to get into direct experience of sensation. And you'll notice even while you're trying to do that, the brain will very quickly want to just replace that, oh, in breath, out breath, or even just sensation, right? Whereas to actually just feel without words, to let go of the labels and the words and to feel the actual sensations, it requires a gentle effort, but over time we really start to connect with direct sensate experience. And the other main thing about that is the more we're feeling directly, then gradually we can let go of the feeler and the sense that I'm feeling something.
Yeah.
And our experience becomes more direct and more what's called non-dual in the meditation traditions, where there's just this unity. And instead of, so I might begin by observing the breath, and then I move into directly feeling the breath, and then I could relax into just being the breath, just the breath breathing itself. And thus the self, that whole self structure, which is the source of all of our self-created stress and pain and confusion, it just naturally falls away. And there's just being, pure being.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting you brought quantum energy and quantum theory into it because you're describing that as being quite new, but I came across that many 20 years ago. It was people like Rupert Sheldrake were involved in that sort of work. I don't know if you're familiar with all this sort of stuff. It seems to have dropped out of favor. So I was quite interested when you've brought that subject back in. Is that something that's having someone blown the dust off the subject and are reconsidering it? Or as actually some new
Yeah.
research?
No, I think so very much. Well, first of all, a lot of people don't realize, it's funny because Western science almost like it tends to pretend like quantum theory is not there, right? But it's very much part of hardcore science, and it's been around since the 1920s, right? So in the early theorists of quantum theory, and their work still stands today, and it continues to evolve. There's lots of quantum mechanics and quantum theory research going on. One author who has certainly, I mean, Rupert Sheldrake and others were popularizing it back in, a
Hmm.
couple decades ago. But today, Deepak Chopra has
Yeah,
two books. He has a book called Quantum Healing, which may be two
yeah.
decades old, but he has a newer book called Quantum Body, which I think is just a year or two old. And so he goes very, very deeply into this. But also, if you just go to your scientific journals, you'll see that there are many journals and many ongoing research studies going on with quantum theory and quantum mechanics and biofield science. And there's a whole field of quantum neuroscience. I mean, there's the whole realm of quantum research is very much alive and well.
Okay, so I mean, Deepak again's been around for a long time, so that's interesting. Okay, going back to the default network and the task network, I'm interested in thinking about some of the more what's it? I'm looking for a word that means sort of self-evident newer conditions. So I'm thinking about
Mhm.
ADHD, ADD. I think you call it ADD in the States, don't you?
Right.
And ASD and such like. I just wonder how, if or how meditation is used in that sort of lack of attention, hyper focus type thing that goes on.
Yeah. So these conditions that are pretty endemic today in our society, ADHD, and also all the forms of being on the spectrum, from autism to Asperger's and milder forms of being on the so-called spectrum and so forth. They're all forms of neural dysregulation, right? They're brain issues. They're brain and nervous system issues. They are something has impacted your brain such that your brain is not operating in an optimal state. It's operating in a dysregulated state. So meditation, especially meditating in this deeply embodied way, uh, can definitely improve brain function. And also, there's some current advancements of integrating meditation with neurofeedback, which can also be a way to retrain the brain and reshape our neural architecture. There's also lots of energy medicine, energy healing modalities, things like emotional freedom technique or tapping, with the tapping that's used in various ways with various dialogue and priming techniques and therapeutic modalities. There's EMDR, and then there's, of course, the more traditional Eastern. But there's a lot of ways that we're understanding a lot more today about how we can work with the brain and the nervous system, how we can work with the energetic fields of the body, and how we can heal.
Mhm.
We know that most chronic ailments, most chronic illnesses are connected with systemic inflammation. And that inflammation begins decades before we end up with something like coronary artery disease or or other heart illnesses or
But then
cancer,
inflammation comes from oxygen
diabetes.
as well. So, where the very thing we depend on is killing us. So it's quite an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with pollutants in the air, pollutants in our food. Our current modern diet for most of us is not very healthy, as
Mm.
well as things, specific toxin exposures,
Yeah.
EFTs, and so forth. There's just a lot of, we in our modern world, we're exposed to a lot of toxins, which is why the importance of your work, that we really need to learn how we can heal ourselves, protect ourselves, and become more resilient.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's good to know that there's people in the States now waking up to this stuff, which is a bit of a relief, really, because the food industry has really had you by the tail for a long time, I think, over there. All right, look, so tell people if they want to get in touch with you, how they can do that, and all those other bits and pieces, the sort of the practical stuff,
Sure. If
Fleet.
people are interested in the process of meditation, I talked about my heartmind.co, heartmind.co. You'll find all of our summits there. We do summits on resilience, rewiring your brain, the art of meditation, all kinds of things, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So go to heartmind.co. There's my regular website, which you can access everything about me at fleetmaull.com. And then if people are interested in my book, Radical Responsibility, it's radicalresponsibilitybook.com.
And
And we,
just give
you
us a
can
bit of
just
an
start
overview
with
of the
heart
book.
mind. Describe that as voluntarily taking 100% ownership for
Mm.
each and every circumstance we face in life, day in and day out. This includes the ones we can, when we get honest, we can see we had a hand in creating or at least allowing or stumbling into, as well as the ones that everyone would agree we had nothing to do with. But the question is, it has happened now. What am I going to do with it? So it's always coming back to the question, no matter how uncomfortable the situation we're in or how unjust the circumstances may appear, what can I do? What's the most
Yeah.
creative way I can respond in any given moment? So it's really about living at choice and not wasting a lot of time in all the convetching and the victim mindsets and so forth, which may be very human, but don't really take us anywhere. Instead, we can focus on what are my options right now? What's the most creative way I can respond to the circumstance I'm facing that's going to benefit myself and others?
Yes. Good. That reminds me, we had a guest on hundreds of episodes ago talking about accountability, and it's very similar, and it's a very powerful concept, I think. Wish I could remember her name. Can't remember her name, doesn't matter. But I think that would be highly recommended because anything around that I think is really important, isn't it? I think we spend too much time in this sort of state of blame rather than actually taking accountability or responsibility for whatever it is that is in our bodies. Let's just start there. Well, look, it's been absolutely. You can tell from listening to Fleet that Fleet knows a lot about subject areas, and it's a huge subject area, which is why and you need to go to the site, have a look, make up your own mind, consume some of the resources, buy the book. I bet you the book's on Amazon and all those other wonderful places. But Fleet, thank you for opening the lid on the box, which is Fleet Maull. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for
You
having me.
take care.